Steve. Let's go ahead and get started. I'd like to take
Okay.
a moment, welcome everyone for attending, and thank you for your attendance today. Welcome to our Business Builder Speaker Series. We know you're busy, and we appreciate you giving us your time. To make the most of your time, we encourage you to ask questions and participate utilizing the chat box. Mark your calendar next month, June 21st from 1 to 2 p.m. Our guest speaker will be Jack Baldwin with Reynard Custom Homes. What does it take to build a home? So tune in the third Wednesday in June at 1 p.m. for our next business builder speaker. This month, I'm excited to introduce Steve Hanley, the owner of Georgia Pine Home Inspections, talking about the importance of having a home inspection to avoid costly repairs. Steve, thanks for joining us today, and I'll turn it over to you, and I'll stop sharing so that you can share your screen.
Thanks, Doug. All right, yeah, let me get this screen share.
While you're doing that, Steve, I'll say that I know you'll enjoy your time today, and I'm sure you'll find the information valuable and usable. It is a 1-hour Zoom presentation, so it isn't a CE credit opportunity, but it is good information.
Yes, great. Thank you, Doug. Yes, I'm Steve Hanley with Georgia Pine Home Inspections. And the more and more inspections that we do, it becomes evident that there are a few different items that we find that typically end with people getting maybe frightened, right? Or those big ticket items that when they come out in the inspection report, the clients get scared, the realtors get scared, and the deal kind of gets in jeopardy because of these few items. From what I find is that a lot of these items can be found before when the realtor and the client are walking through the home. If the realtor knows what to look for, oftentimes they can identify that ahead of time and kind of prep their client to be like, hey, you know what? I know what this is. It's an older type of material. And that way it's not just some big shock and bang when there's one day left in the due diligence period and they don't have time to get contractors out there to give them quotes. So that's what I built this slideshow around. I think there's about 6 or 7 items that we're going to cover. And they're typically the items that we're going to see in older houses, right? So houses that are really older than 1990. None of this stuff we're going to see is going to be newer than the 1990s area. So what we're going to find is that most of these areas are going to be specifically focused on plumbing, electrical, and foundation, right? So if we kind of narrow down the house into those 3 categories, those are the items that can sometimes be costly or make people second guess the fact of buying a home. So before I get started here, Gary, I know Gary, JF, do you mind just taking a second to introduce yourself?
Go ahead, JF.
Hey, hello there. Having some technical difficulties over here. Yep, I'm Jerry Franklin, National One Realty Agent, the Smyrna, Marietta area. So,
Well, welcome, Jerry. Thanks for joining us.
Yeah,
Sure.
Thanks, Jerry. And Gary, why don't you do the same so that way we're all on the same page.
Sure. Hey, Jerry. Hello, everyone. The other 2 know me. So I'm with Maximum One Premier, started in 2007 in Missouri, went to Florida in 18, and I'm a halfback because I moved halfway back to Illinois because Florida was too hot, Illinois too cold.
Yep. Right on. Yep. I appreciate that, Gary. So, with this class being so few people, if there is a question that you have, feel free to reach out to me. You can just kind of speak up, and we can focus on that one area because more than likely, if Gary has a question, Jerry might have that same question, and we can kind of spend our time focusing on that and take a little time away from another item. So, without further ado, let's go ahead and get rolling here. So first up on the list is going to be galvanized steel pipes. All right, so galvanized steel pipes was a very common, and remember, we're talking about supply piping at this point. But it was a very type of supply pipe that we used, and it really was between the 1930s and 70s. And it lasted for a pretty good long time. But what we discovered was as time grew on, the pipes would start to corrode from the inside out. You know, when I teach this class in person, I usually bring a section of that pipe that like that we've cut out and let people look at it. But it's really quite disgusting. And what it is all that rust and corrosion. Let's just say you have a 3/4 inch pipe, which is probably a fairly normal size pipe that you would see kind of running through your house. So at one point it was probably about this big. And as time goes on and that rust starts happening on the inside of the pipe, so the outside might not even have any indications of it, but you may have a hole that is itty bitty hole that water is now traveling through because the rest of the pipe is rusted out. And you know, the first indication of this is brown water. And oftentimes this can be overlooked really easily when you're in a home, and people who are living in a home may not even know. So if you have your water running and it's draining, you have your drains open, you're not going to notice it. But the second that you put that that tub stopper in there or a sink stopper, and you let the water fill up a little bit in pond, what you'll notice is that the water's brown. So that means that that's the water you're eating with, showering with, cleaning your dishes with. So that would be the first bad indication of this type of pipe. And then the second side of it is that eventually when the rust gets so bad, it eats all the way through the pipe to the point where it starts bursting. And then we'll have leaks. So looking at the bottom left image, if you see that, that's the example of when the rust has exceeded the entire pipe and now has rusted through the exterior and we have active leaks. The photo of on the bottom right is the interior of the pipe, where the exterior may look fine when you're looking at it, but that's what the water's traveling through to get to where you ever need to get it to. So the good news is it's really easy to identify, right? Nowadays, all of our piping is going to be a few items. It's going to be plastic, right? So some type of flexible material. It's going to be copper, and we all know what copper looks like. And then the third one's going to be this, right? So if you see like a steel looking pipe, that's what it is. It's either going to be galvanized steel or it's going to be lead-based pipe, lead-based, and that's not any better, right? So lead pipe and galvanized steel pipes, no good. So if you do see it when you're in a home, it's a good idea to go ahead and let your clients know, hey, we have an old type of piping material that we're probably going to need to replace. And when we start talking about repiping a whole home, it certainly can become expensive. Moving on to number 2, this is the question that I get asked most often during from realtors. Like realtors shoot me text messages saying, like, is this polybutylene piping? So polybutylene piping was used in the late 70s all the way up to the mid 90s. And what it was really the first type of plastic material that we used for supply water piping. And it was great because it was cheap, it was flexible, and it was very, very easily installed. Unfortunately, what we discovered was that the pipe started bursting. It was very prone to bursting, and it was typically bursting. Can y'all see my mouse when I move it? Okay, good. So it was bursting at these brass, oftentimes at these brass clamps. And there's a lot of these clamps all throughout the pipe. So when we see that type of pipe, you know, I still see it quite often, maybe once or twice a week, that this will come up on an inspection report. So look at this bottom left photo. So you see this gray pipe, that's what you're going to see running through the house. So if it was like an unfinished basement and you could look up and see the floor joist and you see the water pipes running, this is what that pipe's going to look like. And they were kind enough that they stamp their logo on really about every 9 inches on the pipe. Okay, so if you have this, you're going to know because it's going to be stamped on there. And every single one of these is going to say PB 2110, polybutylene 2110. So there's no guessing game with polybutylene. You're going to know 100% fact. If you can see about this much of the pipe, you're going to see a stamp somewhere on it. I'm looking at these top two images. These are pictures of the water supply pipe from the meter to the house. Okay, so we're talking about like what's going underground. Now these polybutylene pipes were having the same issues. So the difference with them is they were failing because the pressure from oftentimes from like rocks, something that starts pushing up against the pipe, that was bursting those areas and causing those to fail. The unfortunate part of when you see polybutylene is more often than not, if it's inside your home, it was also used to supply water from the meter to the house, right? So you probably have 80 feet of supply pipe that's dug 3 feet underground that needs to be replaced. And on top of that, you have all the water piping through the house. So, it's one of those things that you don't have to do it. It's not going to have that corrosion like that galvanized steel that we just saw. So you're still going to have, clean water, but some people will tell me, well, it's been in my house for 35 years now, and it hasn't had any issues. So I think it's okay. But really, I think that the exact opposite would be true. You should be thinking it more realistically. It's now 35 years old and far past how long they typically last. So the idea of it failing in the near future is much greater.
Hey, Steve, a couple of questions on the polybutylene. This is Jerry. Just, I do quite a bit of investment stuff, so we run across it. But is it definitely have to have that stamp designation? Because I've seen some that looks like polybutylene. It's got the copper clamps. It's gray, but I can't find or does it have like a different designation with the stamp?
It's going to have that PB on there. Now, there's a chance that like it has smeared out, like it's an ink print on there.
Right.
So there's a chance that you won't be able to read that section of it. But if you can dig deep enough and keep on following that pipe, you're going to see something. And
so it should say there's no chances it could be gray with clamps. And I'm not talking about newer PEX, but if it's older gray pipe like that with the copper clamps and you just can't find a designation anywhere, it should be somewhere on the pipe and it's got to say PB 2110.
That's correct. Yeah. And, quite frankly, if you're looking at like a 1980, 1990 home and it looks like this and it's got those brass clamps, it likely is polybutylene.
Yeah, that's what we usually consider it does have it if it has it on there. But I was just trying to get a more definitive way of telling. And I've heard that it's because of the clamping system as to why it can leak, but also I recently heard that it's the material itself that can degrade over time and have leaks in other places. Is that true?
That is true. Okay. Yeah. And it's like, I think that's more often found in that underground pipe that we talked about.
I see.
Yeah. Okay. Where if something could be pressing on it, then like those items started bursting.
I got you. You don't foresee anything with PEX. I mean, having an issue down the road, of course, it's plumbers love it now, but it's kind of the same type of system. As far as you know, it should be good. It's fine now. Do you think there's an issue with that if somebody's repiping?
Hey Jerry, I don't know if you have an earpiece in or something, but you were hard to hear on that last section. Can you say it again?
Oh, sorry. Yeah, I was just wondering with PEX, PEX, it's considered a good way of plumbing. A lot of plumbers prefer that now. Do you foresee? I know it's great and it's fine now, but do you foresee any issues with the clamping mechanism of that, or any issues down the road? Like if someone's trying to decide between PEX and copper, for say, any recommendations there?
Yeah. So it's a good point. And quite frankly, like every material that we've used previously, in the future, we find out something's wrong with it, right?
Right.
So the idea that PEX is going to have something wrong with it 20 years from now, I think is high. Like we're going to be like, oh, like all this stuff starts failing. So like, but as of right now, I think it's a great product.
Gotcha.
And, copper is a great product too. But after 30 years, copper starts to corrode. Like you'll see corrosion on copper pipe too.
Yeah, that's right. Yep.
So like with anything, I think time is the enemy. But if I had the choice, but if I was building my home, I'd build it with PEX.
Okay, that's good to know. All right, well, thanks. Yep.
Yeah.
Steve, one other quick question is, what about CPVC?
Yes. Yeah. So chlorinated PVC, you add the C on there. because they chlorinate the pipe that way, because regular PVC can't handle hot water. So you could have PVC pipe running through your house, but it's only cold supply. You couldn't use it for like water that had gone through your water heater. So that PVC can be used for hot water. Now, it's fine product. People install it, even new construction, usually lower. It's certainly a lower build material. But people install it all the time. I think the biggest complaints I hear out of that type of product is that it is like it gets damaged easily, right? I mean, it's a very small piece of plastic, and it's easily damaged. But it can be used, but it would certainly be considered a lower grade product than copper or PEX.
I think what I'd heard about it is it actually gets brittle over time and more susceptible to fracturing.
Yeah, that's right. But I see them all the time, half the houses I see are using it. But it's like that wouldn't be a building material that I would like call out in the report and say, hey, like you're using CPVC. If I did, I think that would go on half the reports that I do. So I don't see like a big enough of an issue with them that like I don't think people should be using it. But it's not a great material compared to the other things on the market that probably aren't that much more expensive. I do. The biggest thing I see with CPVC is that people will put it on their water heaters, and so it's a plastic material. So if it goes on top of your water heater and you have a gas-fired water heater, that top hood, that's going to be extremely hot, and the pot, it'll melt the pipe. So that type of material cannot be used near like an exterior like heating source.
Is it okay to use it on a pop-off valve on the side, though? I've seen that very commonly, where the side of it has a PVC pop-off valve.
Oh, yeah,
that's okay.
Yeah, TPR valve, that's fine.
Yeah, okay, got it.
Yeah. So it can handle the warmth of like 120 degrees, 140 degrees, but it can't handle the heat of like a combustion product, if that makes more sense. Cool. Good questions. Okay. All right. So we're switching from supply and we're going to waste or drainage. These next two slides, yeah, these are good. So these are kind of going to tie right into each other. But first we're going to talk about cast iron. I wish I could just upload the inspection report from the one that I just left. It was a 1956 house, and like we would cover basically this whole entire slide deck, and you can see real photos. But there probably is some kind of legal issue with me sharing an inspection report. Cast iron drain pipes were used for a very, very long time, and they were a good product for a very long time. But just like anything else, just like we were talking about, over time, they are like nowadays, if you see them in your home, more than likely they're leaking, or if they've cracked or they're corroded. We'll specifically in this next slide, we'll talk about underground drainage pipes, but for this slide specifically, we're talking about like ones in your crawl space, or under your slab. So inside that home perimeter. But what we find is that again, it will start to rust. So the inside of the pipe will rust, and that remember, it's a metal pipe, so it's a very heavy pipe. And usually it's supported by like metal straps every like 4 or 6 feet. And eventually the weight of that pipe will typically start to bow a little bit and put extra stress specifically on the joints. And so if you go in a crawl space, for example, and you see cast iron drain pipes, if you walk up to the joints where one pipe connects to another pipe, you're more than likely going to see a leak at that connection. But worse over is, again, the pipe may look fine from like just standing there looking at it. But if you actually crawl up to it and you look on the bottom, oftentimes you'll see that it's cracked. There's like a micro crack on the bottom of the pipe that basically will go like it could potentially go for the length of the pipe. And what will happen is you'll start to see small, what looks like icicles, right? So if you can imagine like icicles dripping from a roof, you would start to see icicles drip like hanging on the bottom of the pipe. Now, when we say icicles, remember what's going through these pipes. They don't look like icicles, right? They look like brown sickles would be a better terminology for it. And what's happened is that the bottom of it has rusted and they've cracked and they leaked. And the rust around it has likely sealed it over again, but it's left that that area that has cracked and leaked, and eventually it'll crack again. So when I see these cast iron drain pipes, typically it's botched, where like there'll be sections that are PVC, sections that are cast iron, because people will oftentimes go under there, find a leak, replace that one section that's leaking, and leave the other cast iron and deal with that when those issues arise. But when you're buying a home or you're getting an investment property, when you see cast iron, that's one of those times that you got to be thinking to yourself, we should probably factor in the cost of replacing all of these drain pipes, which certainly can be not too cheap. But it gets even more expensive when we start talking about underground, right? So I'm talking about once it leaves your home, it's dug underground, and there's probably, I would say the average length that I see is probably around 80 feet to reach the city connection, or perhaps to reach the septic tank. So we have a camera that we can run into that pipe, and we run it through the interior of the pipe, and we're looking for all this stuff you see in the bottom right hand corner. So cracks, offset pipes, bellies, root intrusion, all those items. So when we're doing a home inspection for somebody, if the home's older than 1975, then I am very, very insistent that we need to get inside that pipe, pay the additional, we charge $225, pay the $225, let us run a camera through there, and we're going to identify what this bottom left-hand corner looks like. If it's cast iron or it's terracotta, there's going to be roots in the pipe. I would say 95% of the time there's going to be roots in those pipes, just because they don't seal right. Where two pipe, and really the joints in the pipe are every 4 feet. So terracotta, clay, your joints about every 4 feet. PVC, your joints can be like 15 or 20 feet. So every 4 feet in those pipes, we're seeing roots. Now, there's few different things you can do when you see roots in a pipe. One of them is you could hire somebody to basically clean the interior of the pipe. And that would consist of like hydro jetting would be an example of how to do that, where they take a pressurized, kind of like a pressure washer that you would wash your driveway with, but it's able to go inside of your pipe, and it would basically blast all the roots out of the pipe. So that's an option, but with the understanding that roots are going to grow right back in. So it's something that you would have to hire somebody, and maybe really you'd have to figure out how fast the roots are growing, but it might be something every 6 months. Someone has to come out there and clean your roots. Because what you see in this photo is, remember, this is a 4-inch pipe. And all this is roots, and this water is traveling through this little gap right here. And eventually these roots are going to grow to where the water doesn't travel anymore, and it's just hitting this wall. And then people start flushing solids, wipes, people put stuff down the toilet, like rags, stuff like that, paper towels. And that is what leads to backups, right? If the water starts hitting all that root intrusion and it has nowhere to go, it's got nowhere to go except for back up into your house. And if you know someone who's had to deal with that, it's catastrophic. It's a fairly terrible thing to go through. Speaking of repairs on that, most homeowners insurances will cover the damage of a sewer backup into your home. So sewer backs up, it starts flooding up your bath or comes out of your toilet, and you have sewer like throughout your basement, for example. Most people's policy would cover the remediation of getting your home back in order. But what they don't cover is that sewer pipe, right? So that 80 feet of sewer pipe that needs to be dug out, replaced, and replaced, people don't account for that cost, which can easily be $10,000, $15,000. So you know, when we see these older houses, it's again, like it's super important to pay the few extra dollars, get a camera down there and see what you're working with. And you know, really to be fair, I make it consistent, or I make it a purpose to really drive people when it's an old house. If it's a newer house, the likelihood of finding something wrong in the sewer is certainly lower. But I find stuff all the time. 1980, 1990, 2010, 2020, brand new construction. I've done 2 DR Horton houses that they had to dig up the garage because they laid them the wrong, they laid the pipes in the wrong direction. So, you know, really, it's like I really started doing these sewer cameras about, I think about a year and a half ago, and it's been incredibly eye-opening. And I do my best to try to spread knowledge about how important it is to get these items looked at, because, you know, you think your house is 30 years old, you're not going to have any issues, but guess what? Like the earth settles, the pipe moves, people drive over the pipe. Maybe they forgot to put primer on the PVC and roots come in. So it's, you know, however old your house is a good idea of how long it's been since someone's looked inside that pipe. So that's what I got about sewer cameras. Anybody got any questions about cast iron drain, terracotta, or cast iron?
Not at this time.
Okay, thanks. Oh, Orangeburg. Let me go back real quick. Orangeburg this is a pipe material that came out of, I think it was New York. And what it was wood fibers that used asphalt to shape them, and that's what the pipe was made out of. It was only used from like 1940 to like 1956 or something like that. It was a very short period of time, and we don't see it a lot, but I think I've done like 6 or 7 houses that have had it. And this pipe material is terrible. As you can imagine, it's made out of wood pulp. So over the years, what happens is if you have a 4-inch pipe, it looks like about this, it'll start to squeeze downwards, where the pipe will be very elongated, but maybe it only might be this high. So eventually the pipe will come to it where the weight above that pipe eventually will collapse it. So if you see if you have Orangeburg, that's a hands down. We got to dig it up and put PVC in. Okay, septic systems. So septic system, this is something that we're not able to inspect. Okay. So typically when you buy a home, if you want someone to take your lid off, pump, that's going to be beyond the home inspector. But it is important to acknowledge the fact that if you have a damaged drain line or drain field, or maybe like you have a damaged tank, those repairs are extremely expensive. So, and it's, some of those things are super obvious. Like if you see the photo here, like we know something's going on, but that's not always what it looks like. So the way that I think about septic systems is that if you read like a plumber's website, they'll say, hey, you got to have your tank inspected every 3 to 5 years, which I think is reasonable, considering like an average person's, you know, size of a family. If it's like one old lady who lives there by herself, maybe 10 years is fine. But every 3 to 5 years is a good way to think about it. But oftentimes people will be selling a home and they'll get a record that shows that they had the septic tank inspected a year and a half ago, and they're like, okay, well, it's only been a year and a half, I think we're good. But the way that I think about it is, it's been a year and a half of somebody else living in that home, right? Like somebody else flushing condoms, flushing tampons, like I said before, putting grease down there. A septic system is a natural system that can only work with items that break down. If you put anything in there that won't break down, that's how you ruin a septic tank. So if it's been a year and a half, someone else has been living there flushing who knows what, really the only way to know the condition of it is to get it inspected. So for my take, every cell of the home, if there's a septic system, it should be inspected. That's a short little video. We're going to skip over that. Okay, this is just a question that I get asked very often, and it's all about stucco. So the EIFS stucco, the exterior insulation and finish system, is a modified way of stucco as opposed to like the 3-coat stucco, and or commonly referred to as the hard coat stucco. Now, to be fair, this type of stucco isn't a inferior product. What it is it got put on a ton of houses in the 90s, and what they found was that most builders didn't understand how to properly flash it. So the material itself isn't defective, but it requires a certain way of installing it to make sure that that doesn't get behind it. And the reason why it's on this list is because if water is getting behind it, like you can see in that bottom right photo, like we have substantial water damage that's likely causing rot to our exterior framing, like load bearing walls. That's no good. But if it's getting back there, someone has to rip off all the stucco and then maybe the wall sheathing, and then maybe even start replacing some of the studs, which, as you can imagine, would be a very intrusive project. Now, the only real way to check is if it's bad enough, you'll know. Like if you ever see water on the inside of your house, like you have a terrible problem. But you can tell if water's getting stucco by, unfortunately, you have to like drill holes. So what it would be is you can go up to the wall, you can drill 2 holes inside of that stucco. You're going to go past the that outer layer of stucco they put on there. You got to go past that insulation until you hit the wall sheathing. And then you have to take moisture meters that are, small moisture meters. You can stick them into those holes, and you can take the level of moisture on that wall sheathing. So that's really the way to do it. We don't do that. Most inspectors don't, because that crosses the line of becoming intrusive, right? So a home inspection is a very unintrusive way where, we're not damaging somebody's home, basically, is a way of thinking about it. So if that's the type of, oh, Gary, cool. Is that your hand up?
Yes. I should have asked you a second ago, but on septic inspections, how far can you go? I mean, you can view the tank, you can camera into the laterals or no? And how do you know if old laterals are truly functioning? Can the septic tank give you that indication? I don't know what I don't know.
The sewer lateral that leads to the tank?
No, from the line, from the house to the tank, but from the tank out, whether it's
the drain
snake
field.
Yeah, how do you know if the drain field is functioning? Because I've seen some really old ones and the house has been abandoned for a while. How do you know that might work or not?
Yeah, I do know that they have the capability of taking very, very small cameras and running it through it, to check some of the lines to see if they're holding water. There might also be like a dye test that they can use to determine if it's working properly. But I'm not totally sure on how they inspect the actual drain field. But you're right. I mean, it's a very important part of it. And if it's kind of like a building. It happens over time, right? So if your tank fails, and now you get solids that come from your tank and they reach the lateral that goes to your drain field, you can imagine the little holes in the drain field are itty bitty. So if you get a solid or some type of material that was flushed that shouldn't have been flushed that goes out into that, they would clog up those holes very quickly. And that's how you would know that, like, that they're having a big problem. So they certainly can look at that lateral that connects to the drain field. And I think that they'd be able to tell by the amount of water in there if the drain field's working properly or not.
Okay, thank you very much.
Yeah. Okay. And then really for this last part, I just wanted to address, like, at least for my company, if somebody wants to have it tested, we just refer it out to a stucco contractor. They'll come out there. They usually go around windows and doors, right? Anywhere that there's a break in the siding and someone had to install flashing, or where the roof meets the wall, those are the areas that they're going to test. They'll drill 2 holes, put the meters in there, see if they're leaking or not, and then they'll just caulk up the holes afterwards. Obviously after receiving permission from the owner. Okay, hardboard siding. So everybody calls it something else, right? Like most people call it LP siding just because they were the famous manufacturer that got sued, and they paid out quite a bit of money in a lawsuit. But hardboard siding, masonite, press board, synthetic, it's all the same thing. What it is, just like that pipe that we talked about, that was wood fibers. This is wood fibers as well. So it's wood fibers that were that use resin and were pressed together. And it was also very, very widely used throughout the 80s and 90s. When you get into a neighborhood that has them, oftentimes like the whole neighborhood has it, or maybe even like that whole area, like several neighborhoods will have it. But what we discovered was that over time, it's very prone to water damage. So what would happen is water would hit the siding, and while it's running down, you see this bottom lip right here, it would hit that bottom lip and wick back under that bottom lip. Now that bottom lip is probably only a ½ inch wide, but when it runs down that siding and it hits that bottom of it, it'll start wicking its way back up into the siding. So this photo is obvious, right? Like you see like the ripples in the wood, and what that is it's water that has worked its way up there. And it's done. There's no way to come back from that. So that's for sure like total replacement. And the way to know what type of siding that is if you walk up to it and you look on the bottom edge. Oftentimes with this pressboard sidings, you'll see cracks, very, very small cracks. And if you took like a pocket knife, for example, and you stuck a pocket knife, what you would feel is that it would just go right up through it. Even if it felt kind of solid on the outside when you're pressing on it, if you press up through it, you'll notice that it would probably just slide right up there. So, by the way, if you have this, that lawsuit's come and gone a long time ago, so no money left from Louisiana Pacific or Georgia Pacific. But I will say I do see this product still quite often, and if you are a homeowner that took good care of your siding, it can still be in good shape. If you painted your house every 3 years or however long it needed, and kept it sealed up, it's probably still in really good shape. But the issue is that maybe that homeowner who lived there for the past 30 years kept it in good shape, but when somebody moves in, they don't know they have to paint their house every 3 years, and then it rots on year 4 or year 5. So something to be on the lookout for. Really, the only thing that it's either going to be wood, like cedar siding, it's going to be this press board, or it's going to be cement siding. Pretty easy to tell the difference. There's a pretty big difference when you walk up and touch a board that feels like cement or it feels like or press board, and then like cedar has a different look to it. It looks like real wood does. So that is hardboard siding. Okay, dangerous electrical panels. So I want to make a caveat to this and say if your panel was prior than 1980 or 1970 might be a better idea. More than likely, you probably need a new panel. A lot of people don't consider the fact that panels have a life expectancy just like everything else does. Breakers are mechanical. So like anything else that's mechanical, it fails over age. So if you have a 50-year-old panel, the likelihood of breakers failing to trip is much, much higher. And the only purpose of a breaker is to trip for overcurrent. So if you have overcurrent going through there and it's not tripping, then you have excessive amount of heat because of the overcurrent, and that could eventually lead to a fire. But I want to talk about 3 brands that are that you will be able to identify just by looking at the panel. Not having to open it up, not having to know the age. If you see FPE, Federal Pacific Electric, if you see Zinsco or GTE Sylvania, it's time to go. Those panels have had significant amount of research and historical data that shows that they have a very, very high fail rate of breakers failing to trip. When you see them, they look different too. like if you look at that bottom right hand corner, you see like the color codes of it. They look strange. So when you're looking at it, you'd be like, man, that doesn't quite look like the type of electrical panel that I'm used to seeing. That's because it's not. They're a totally different breaker design, and they look much different. I think I can leave it at that. But if you researched FPE Zinsco, so FPE is different, but Sylvania bought Zinsco but kept the same panel, so that's why both of those names are problematic. Aluminum wiring, this doesn't require a whole lot of attention. It might be good, Jerry, if you're into the investments. But this was primarily focused on. Oops, let me get back to that slide. Sorry. So when I talk about aluminum wiring, I'm talking about the 15 and 20 amp single strand aluminum. So I'm not talking about like the big wires, that like the big service wires. Those are all aluminum. Or even like the double pole, the 240 volts, like maybe it goes to your range, or maybe it goes to like your dryer or something like that. Those are all aluminum too, but they're multi-strand, meaning if you looked at them, they would have a whole bunch of wires kind of like coiled up together. Those aren't problematic. What is problematic is the single strand, one single piece of aluminum. And that's connected to like your lights and outlets. And what we discovered was that it was a short period of time. Let's see, was it 1965 to 1972? So a very short period of time that we had a shortage of copper. So we decided to use aluminum. And we discovered that aluminum does not contain heat as well. So it would expand and contract as the current was going through the wire, and it was getting hot and getting cold. The wire was, when it expanded, it was becoming loose and not like gripping whatever the lug was that it was powering, to the point where eventually it might become disconnected, and then you would get arcs, sparks, and fires. So if you have aluminum wiring, there's a low chance you do. I don't see it very often, but if you do, getting it insured would be very, very, very difficult. Most insurance providers would not cover a house that has aluminum wiring. But there are a few ways you can do something about it, right? So you could, one is you rewire the whole house. That would be a very costly repair. Number two is they do make individual clamps where an electrician can go to basically every single outlet and every light, anything that the aluminum wire is going to, and they would pigtail a copper. They would clamp onto it, pigtail a copper, and the copper would connect to the outlet. So that is something you can do. That's not cheap either, because you can imagine it's pretty labor intensive, but it's certainly better than leaving that aluminum wire in place. Okay, when we look at roofs, if you're total replacement of a roof, then you don't need a home inspector to tell you that. It's one of those things that you can just kind of from the driveway look up and look at your roof. If you ever see them curling, shingles curling, or you see how these are white, they have like a white tone to them. So what that is, a shingle is manufactured with a fiberglass mat, a white fiberglass mat. They pour asphalt on top of it, and they pour granules on top of it. The granules reflect the sun. But over time, the granules will fall off. The sun will start baking through the asphalt, and then you see white, and that's the fiberglass mat. So if you see white, not good. Time to get new shingles. And if you ever see like the dark sections, these black things, that's a shingle that's flipped over, right? So if you picked up that shingle and you flipped it back the other way, you would look normal. But oftentimes, like you can just easily identify when you see the dark black spots on a shingle. Yeah, that's wind damage. Okay, foundation repairs. This is also another big one. So whenever you talk about foundation walls or water, you're talking expense, like your expenses go up pretty quickly. And water can enter a foundation through a lot of different areas. If you take a peek at that bottom right-hand corner, what you'll see is it almost looks like it's pointing to everywhere in the basement, right? So water can enter through the smallest crack. So like I'm talking like a 1/32 inch crack. And oftentimes you'll see cracks in a basement. A poured concrete wall is going to have cracks in it. It's going to shrink. It's going to settle. It's going to move a little bit. You're going to see some cracks. But as long as these cracks are this way and they're relatively small, then it's no structural concern at all. But what it is a concern for is water. So water can make its way through those cracks. And from my experience and kind of some of the quotes that I've received from clients about getting these cracks sealed up, you're probably looking at about $800 a crack. So if you have 6 or 7 cracks that have water coming through it, and then you have cracks on your basement floor that's got water coming through it, using epoxy ejection to seal up these cracks can become very, very expensive very quickly. And then when we talk about foundation movement, okay, so that bottom left-hand corner, that wall's bowing, right? So remember, cracks this way, vertical up and down, are typically okay. Cracks going this way on a foundation wall are not okay, or really even this way either. So 45 degrees, or if we're going straight horizontal, is not good. And what that indicates is that the hydrostatic pressure from the soil is now pressing on our wall to the point where it starts to, you'll see it start to crack right down the middle typically. And that's where the walls are going to start bowing. When the walls start bowing, now it's time we got to put some like piers in there that would go into like the basement and up into the floor joist, and they're going to put them probably every like 4 feet or 6 feet or something, trying to keep that wall from moving any further. So both of those items can become expensive pretty quickly, and both of those items, I feel like a real estate agent, if while walking through the home, can identify before a home inspector even gets there. Like these aren't items you need a flashlight and or any other types of tools. When you see water, you know it's water. And I'm not talking about puddles of water on the floor. I'm talking about water stains, right? So if you see an area that's discolored, or it's like there's like white powder around it, like that's what I'm talking about with water. Okay. That's foundation. We're gonna, okay, mold. This is a good one. So mold this is the way I think about mold. So if you have mold like in your shower, right? Like your kitchen sink leaked, or you had water that ran out of your shower and down on your drywall, and you see like some black mold, I think that's fairly normal with most houses. Stuff happens, stuff leaks. If it's my house personally, I'm just gonna go ahead and clean it up. I'm put some type of cleaner on there and move on with my life. Where it becomes problematic, in my opinion, is when your entire crawl space is covered with mold. And I would say a high majority, 90%, let's call it 90% of crawl spaces have a fairly significant amount of mold in them. Really, the only ones that don't have mold are crawl spaces that have been encapsulated, meaning like completely sealed up from top to bottom. There's no wall vents in there anymore, and they're like, they have a dehue running, and actually they have like air that's being blown into that area too, to create a finished area pretty much. You can't live there, but it makes it a finished area. So full crawl spaces become very expensive, and then air ducts. So an air duct, that's one of those areas that you really won't be able to see unless maybe you take off some of the wall vents, like the big return vents, and take a look in there and see what you see. But hiring like an HVAC company to do a deep clean of your supply ducts can certainly become a fairly expensive thing pretty quickly. And then I have this last slide in there just to talk about asbestos in general. So if you're buying an older home, then like let's call it 70s, or I think like on y'all probably know the exact date. I think the real estate form has it like 1976 or something like that. If it's 1976 or older, there's a decent chance that you got asbestos in your house. And the older back you go, the higher chances you have, right? So like a 1920 home has a very, very high chance of having asbestos somewhere. Most people commonly think of asbestos on like maybe the exterior siding, and the insulation, maybe the floor tiles, but it was used in hundreds of building materials. Like I'm talking stuff you don't even think about, like caulk. So, but asbestos only becomes problematic when you make it friable, or when it becomes airborne. So if you have a 9x9 floor tile that has asbestos in it, it's no big deal. People are walking on it, living on it every day. But the second you take a saw to it, you want to like remove these 9x9 tiles, or you take a jackhammer or something, and you hit it and it becomes friable, that is when those fibers, asbestos fibers, you can inhale them, they get in your lungs, and we all know that that is not good. So, you know, if I see something that I suspect is being asbestos, it certainly would go into an inspection report. But really, the only way to identify it for sure was if you have to take that sample and send it off to a laboratory, and they would test it. And really, the thing to know about it is that if it comes back as high asbestos, then the idea of hiring someone to take it away, to one, remove it, just increase dramatically. Like, let's just say you have asbestos insulation in your attic. The precautions that they have to take and the fees they have to pay to take it somewhere are extremely high. So instead of just paying $3,000 to add insulation to your attic, you might easily triple or quadruple that cost. Let's see here. Lead-based paint disclosures. Oh, 1978 lead-based paint. Yeah, thanks, Gary. Okay, I think that's about what I got, guys. So if there's any items on this PowerPoint that we covered that you are concerned with, or you have a question, let me know. Or if there's something else that you're kind of thinking of, like, hey, I wish we would have talked about this, you can let me know that too, and I do my best to answer the question. Okay.
Steve, you've covered a good bit of material. Anyone have any questions about what we've been over today? If not, Steve, do we have a slide with your contact information?
I might. Let's see here.
Right at the bottom of that. last
There it is.
There we go. The number's small, but there it is on the bottom. You can Google me, Georgia Pine Home Inspections. Our business line, 770-285-7106.
All right.
If anybody wants this slide deck, shoot me an email. My email is steve@georgiapineinspections.com. See here if I can.
Are you going to put it in the chat?
Yeah, that's a good idea. All right, there we go in the chat.
All right. Well, Steve, thanks for being our guest today on our Business Builder Speaker Series. I know I personally enjoyed it and learned some good information. It just makes me wary of the things that I just don't think about, even in my own home, and hope I'm properly caring for things and hoping my drain pipes aren't collapsing beneath me and everything that we've seen. But if there are no other questions, thanks for attending today. And reminder to join us Wednesday, June 21st at 1 o'clock for our next edition of our Business Builder Speaker Series. Thanks again, and go out and make today a great day for your real estate. And we look forward to seeing you soon. Thanks.